I can still feel the damp Savannah air clinging to my skin the moment I stepped into my beach house and sensed something was wrong. The place smelled like my lavender cleaner, yet the lights upstairs glowed faintly, as if someone had tried to hide their presence in a hurry. My heart pushed against my ribs as I moved through the quiet, every creak of the floorboards sounding louder than it should have. If you've ever walked straight into a truth that nearly knocked the air out of you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. I promise, stories like this happen more often than we admit. What I found in that house shattered the life my daughter thought she had, and that was only the beginning. Let me show you how it all began. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into my place in Savannah. The air felt disturbed, like someone had shaken the house and walked away. I remember freezing in the entryway, hearing soft laughter drifting from upstairs. Laughter that didn't belong in my home. Laughter that didn't belong to my daughter's husband. By the time I reached the staircase, my stomach had already tightened into a cold knot. I didn't need to see faces to understand what I had walked into. That realization hit me harder than I ever expected. I stood there, gripping the railing, feeling the weight of betrayal crash through me. My daughter, Lauren, had spent years trying to hold her marriage together, believing she only needed to be more patient, more supportive, more understanding. And yet here he was, tangled up with someone else in the one place I kept sacred, a house my late husband and I built out of love, a place I had been preparing to sell after months of financial strain. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm a widow in my early 60s, and I've learned to live with grief. But this was different. There was something darker hiding beneath the surface, something I didn't have a name for yet. As I backed away from the stairs, I felt the first tremor of truth rising inside me. What I had just witnessed wasn't the real beginning, only the doorway into something far more painful. And to understand how everything fell apart, I need to take you back to where all of this truly started. I remember standing in that hallway in Savannah, trying to steady my breath. And for a moment, all I could feel was the history inside those walls. That house wasn't just a vacation spot. It was the last place my husband and I ever renovated together. The place where Lauren learned to ride her bike in the driveway. The place we escaped to whenever life felt too heavy. After he passed, the house became my anchor. Even when I told myself I was ready to let it go, I used to picture him sitting on the back porch at 2:30 p.m., feet up, smiling at the marsh. Those memories carried me through the hardest nights of widowhood. Selling the house was supposed to be a practical decision, something responsible, something that would help me stay afloat after a year of medical bills and shifting income. But deep down, I knew I was also closing a chapter I had been afraid to face. Thinking about Lauren before she met Andrew always brings a softness over me. She was bright, curious, steady in her confidence. When she introduced him, I remember trying to quiet a small ripple of unease I couldn't quite name. Something in his eyes felt calculating, but I convinced myself I was being overprotective. Over time, I watched my daughter shrink, second-guessing herself, apologizing for things she never would have before, losing that spark she'd carried since childhood. Those changes haunted me more than I admitted, and as my finances tightened, I thought selling the Savannah house might somehow help her too, give her a little stability, a safety net. Standing in that hallway after seeing the truth for myself, I felt everything collide at once. And that's when I realized I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I had to understand exactly what I had walked into. I remember how the house felt when I stepped back into the present moment, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath with me. The familiar scent of salt air and old pine should have comforted me, but something in the atmosphere felt disturbed. A shoe abandoned near the rug, a jacket I didn't recognize draped carelessly over a chair. Small, careless clues that told me I wasn't alone. Then I heard it, a faint rustle from upstairs, followed by the soft edge of laughter. Not mine, not Lauren's. A sound too intimate, too relaxed, to belong in my home without my knowing. My heartbeat stumbled, then steadied into something heavier. I remember placing my hand against the wall, trying to calm the tremor in my body as dread pooled low in my stomach. Each step up the staircase felt slower than the last, as if my mind wanted to delay the truth it already understood. When I reached the landing, I didn't need to open the bedroom door all the way. A glimpse was enough. The outline of my son-in-law, Andrew, intertwined with a woman I'd never seen before, completely at ease in a space built from my family's memories. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. The shock was sharp, but the anger that followed was colder, clearer. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of heartbreak and a strange kind of clarity. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was who he was. And suddenly, I saw every small red flag I'd ignored, every shift in Lauren's spirit, every uneasy feeling I had smothered. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply let the truth settle into me, heavy and undeniable. And in that stillness, I felt something shift inside, a quiet, steady resolve rising through the hurt. I realized this betrayal was only the surface of something much darker, and I knew, without hesitation, that I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with next. When I finally stepped back outside, the air felt heavier than before, as if the world had rearranged itself in the span of a few minutes. I sat in my car for a long moment, letting the shock settle into something quieter, more focused. The initial sting of betrayal was still sharp, but beneath it, a different instinct began to form, one that pushed me to look beyond the pain and pay attention to the details I had ignored for too long. I found myself replaying little moments with Andrew, the way he always brushed off certain questions or shifted conversations when money came up. I remembered the nervous laugh he used when I mentioned the household budget, and the way Lauren seemed to shrink whenever financial topics were raised. Those memories nudged me toward a realization I didn't want to face. The affair wasn't the whole story. It was a symptom of something deeper. Before leaving Savannah, I moved quietly through the house, noting what didn't belong. An expensive watch on the nightstand, a travel bag carelessly unzipped, receipts sticking out of a jacket pocket, hotel stays, dinners, purchases that didn't fit the income Andrew claimed to earn. I slipped them into my purse without a second thought, feeling a strange steadiness settle inside me. On the drive home, I called the only person I trusted with something like this, Mark Henderson, a retired detective who had been a close friend of my husband. I didn't recount the details aloud, but I let him hear the heaviness in my voice, and he understood. His calm, measured questions helped me steady my breathing. When he told me to gather everything I could before confronting Andrew or alerting Lauren, something inside me clicked into place. That night, I pulled out old bank statements and emails Lauren had forwarded over the years, the ones she never thought twice about. Patterns emerged, withdrawals she didn't recognize, transfers made at odd hours, accounts she had no memory of opening. The more I looked, the more my chest tightened. This wasn't just infidelity. It was deception woven into her life, into her trust, into her future. And as the truth continued to unfold, I felt the first real pulse of determination. Whatever Andrew was hiding, I was going to uncover it, and I needed to be ready for the moment he realized I had started to put the pieces together. I spent the night preparing myself for what I knew I had to do. The hurt was still there, raw around the edges, but I pushed it down until only a clear, steady intention remained. If I wanted the truth, I had to stop reacting to Andrew and start studying him. I reminded myself that people like him showed their real nature when they believed they held the upper hand. So I decided to give him that illusion, just long enough to see what he would do with it. When he came by the next morning, he carried the same easy confidence he always used around me, a kind of practiced charm that felt more like a performance now that I could see through it. He looked at me as if I were fragile, overwhelmed, easy to direct. I let him believe that. I softened my voice, lowered my guard, and pretended to be unsure of myself. Almost immediately, he slipped into manipulation. He spoke about stress, about Lauren's needs, about how finances were tightening. I could tell he expected me to fill the gaps, to offer help without questions. His tone held the quiet pressure of someone used to getting what he wanted by making others feel responsible for his comfort. As he talked, I watched the tiny shifts in his face, the flickers of irritation when I played clueless, the way his eyes sharpened when I hinted at being financially stretched. He overplayed his hand quickly. He hinted that I should transfer money for an investment he claimed was urgent, something he insisted would secure Lauren's future. But the details changed as he spoke. Small inconsistencies he didn't think I would notice. I logged each one silently, keeping my expression gentle, even grateful. When he pressed harder, trying to make me feel guilty for hesitating, something inside me went cold. It wasn't just entitlement. It was calculation. He wasn't protecting Lauren's future. He was exploiting it. And as he kept talking, he revealed more than he intended, expenses he shouldn't have known about, plans he had no reason to be involved in, assumptions about my accounts he had no right to access. That was the moment the truth settled over me like a weight. Andrew wasn't simply unfaithful. He was dangerous. He was weaving himself into our lives with an agenda I hadn't yet uncovered, one that stretched far beyond an affair. I kept my demeanor soft until he left, thanking him as if he had done me some great kindness. But the moment the door closed, my resolve hardened. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed law enforcement. I needed evidence. And I needed to move quietly, because Andrew was far more tangled in our lives than I had ever imagined. It was time to bring in Mark and expose the larger conspiracy waiting just beneath the surface. I walked into Andrew's office with the kind of steady breath a person takes before stepping onto thin ice. I reminded myself that I had to look uncertain, even grateful, as if I had come to him for guidance instead of answers. Inside, though, I kept a razor focus. Every detail mattered now. The building itself was polished in a way that almost felt aggressive. Glass, steel, and carefully curated art pieces lined the lobby. Everything screamed success, but in a way that felt hollow, like someone had studied what success should look like and replicated it without understanding the substance beneath. As I rode the elevator, I kept thinking about how much effort it took to maintain an image that perfect, and how much someone like Andrew might do to keep it from cracking. His office was even more extravagant, positioned in a corner with sweeping views of the city. He greeted me with the kind of confident warmth he used whenever he wanted control, and I let him believe it was working. I softened my shoulders, pretended to admire the space, and acted as though I needed his advice. He wasted no time directing me toward an opportunity. He laid out a real estate investment that he framed as secure and time-sensitive, and I listened as if I were hoping he would save me. But the longer he talked, the more the inconsistencies piled up. Numbers shifted, terms blurred. He spoke in circles whenever I gently asked about risk, as though he expected me to trust him without question. As he talked, I picked up on subtle things: files arranged too neatly, a locked drawer he kept glancing at, the faint tension around his jaw when I played, confused. I caught a glimpse of documents on his desk that didn't match what he was describing. They referenced accounts I knew Lauren didn't have access to, and transfers that made no sense for someone with their income. Listening to him, I felt a wave of unease heavier than the shock of the affair. This wasn't just selfishness. This wasn't even simple manipulation. This was calculated misconduct, the kind that required layers of lies and a willingness to use anyone, including my daughter, to keep it alive. I kept my expression soft and appreciative, even as my stomach tightened. I told myself to memorize everything, every slip, every contradiction. I knew then that this wasn't something I could handle alone. It was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than I had realized. As I left the building, I already knew what had to come next. It was time for Mark to show me what he suspected, and to confront the real truth hiding beneath Andrew's polished surface. I sat with Lauren on the edge of her living room sofa, trying to steady my breathing before I told her the truth. I could feel the weight of what I carried pressing against my ribs, and I knew the moment it left my mouth, her life would divide into a before and after she never asked for. She looked tired, distant, worn down in ways she didn't recognize yet, and it made my heart ache. I had spent years watching her dim under Andrew's shadow, and now I had to shine a light so bright it would burn. When I began, she frowned in confusion, trying to understand why my voice shook. The first hint of disbelief crossed her face when I explained what I'd seen. Her mind pushed back, clinging to the version of her husband she had defended for so long. I watched her chest tighten, her breath stutter, her hands tremble as denial gave way to something heavier. When I told her about the financial pieces, the schemes, the accounts, she sank into herself as if the floor had given out beneath her. The grief hit hard. She folded forward, shoulders shaking, whispering questions I could only answer with silence. I could see her blaming herself, wondering what she had done wrong, replaying every moment she ignored the discomfort she once brushed aside. It felt like watching her break in slow motion, every piece of her trust splintering at once. I moved closer, grounding her with my presence, reminding her that she was not at fault, that manipulation can twist even the strongest minds. I held her hands as she fought through the storm inside her. Slowly, her grief loosened its grip and something sharper emerged. Anger, not loud or wild, but cold, trembling, exhausted. The kind that comes when someone finally sees the truth clearly. She lifted her head, eyes swollen but focused, and I felt the shift inside her. She was still hurting, still fragile, but a small flame of resolve had sparked beneath the wreckage. She asked me, with a voice barely steady, what we were going to do next. In that moment, I knew she was ready to stop being his shield. She was ready to fight for herself. And I knew exactly who we needed to meet as we prepared for what was coming. I barely slept the night before the arrest. Even with the plan laid out and every precaution in place, my nerves felt stretched thin. I kept replaying the past weeks in my mind, reminding myself why this had to happen, why justice needed to be more than an idea. When morning light finally edged through the blinds, I knew there was no turning back. Lauren was safe at a friend's house, wrapped in a quiet space where she wouldn't hear or see any of this. That was the only thing steadying my breathing. I waited in my car down the block from Andrew's office, watching as unmarked vehicles rolled into position. The whole scene felt strangely still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. When the officers stepped out and moved in, a cold rush went through me. This was the moment everything fractured. From my distance, I could see the exact second Andrew realized the world he built was collapsing. The arrogance that had always clung to him slipped away, leaving only shock and panic. It struck me how someone who strutted through life with such certainty could crumble so fast. It wasn't satisfying the way I once imagined. It was sobering. It was sad. And yet it was necessary. As they led him out, my hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. I felt a mix of relief and grief twisting together. A strange ache in my chest for all the damage he had caused, for all the years Lauren spent believing in someone who never deserved her. When the cars pulled away, the silence felt heavy. The danger was finally breaking apart, piece by piece, and I could breathe in a way I hadn't realized I'd forgotten. But the truth hung there too. This wasn't the end. This was only the moment the storm stopped long enough for us to face the wreckage it left behind. And I knew that when I saw Lauren next, she would finally learn everything. When I brought Lauren home after the arrest, she moved through the house like someone walking through smoke, unable to fully see or breathe. She sat on the couch with her hands in her lap, staring at nothing, as if her mind couldn't decide which part of her life had just shattered. I sat beside her quietly, giving her space to exist in that first wave of shock. She looked so small in that moment, so stripped of the certainty she once carried. When she finally lifted her eyes toward me, I knew she was ready for the rest of the truth. I walked her through the pieces she hadn't heard yet, the hidden accounts, the fabricated investments, the way he'd used her name for things she never consented to. Each detail landed like another weight on her shoulders. I could almost feel the air tighten around her as denial fought with understanding. Then the grief came. It rolled through her suddenly, shaking her whole body, pulling her backward into memories she'd trusted. I saw the anger spark beneath the surface, then dim, then flare again as she tried to make sense of how someone she loved so deeply could manipulate her so thoroughly. She kept blaming herself in small, fractured phrases, wondering how she could have missed so much. I told her what I had held in my heart for years, that manipulation can be quiet, patient, and calculated, and even the strongest person can be swallowed by it without ever seeing the teeth. I reminded her that she wasn't weak. She was targeted, she was used, and none of this was her fault. Slowly, her breath steadied, her shoulders eased, and for the first time since this began, I saw a flicker of acceptance behind her tears. She asked me, barely above a whisper, how we start putting her life back together. And in that question, I heard the beginning of her rebuilding. In the weeks that followed, the house finally felt still. The frantic energy that had filled every corner seemed to fade, leaving room for something gentler to take its place. I watched Lauren move through those early days with a kind of fragile steadiness, as if she were relearning how to exist without bracing for impact. There was a calm after the storm, quiet but real, and it gave both of us the first breaths we'd taken in months. She started therapy almost immediately, walking into each session with a mixture of dread and determination. I could see how hard it was for her to revisit the pieces of herself she had tried to hide. But every time she came home, there was a little more light in her eyes. She met with financial advisors too, sorting through the mess he left behind, reclaiming accounts that were rightfully hers, and beginning the long process of cleaning up what he had tried to bury. The milestones were small, making her own decisions without second guessing. Cooking dinner while humming again, picking out new bedding to replace the set he insisted she choose years ago. But they mattered. They were signs of a woman stepping back into her life. And while she healed, I felt something shift inside me as well. I had been so consumed with protecting her that I hadn't noticed how much of my own grief I'd set aside. In the quiet moments, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of aging, widowhood, and the fear of almost losing my daughter to someone else's darkness. But then, one afternoon, I saw her laugh, a genuine, unguarded laugh, and it was like watching her step back into the sun. Strength was returning to her in ways that reminded me of the girl she used to be, but wiser now, more grounded. We began talking about the future again, not in fear, but in possibility. And as those conversations grew, I knew we were heading toward the final part of this journey, the part where we make meaning out of everything we survived. There are mornings now when I sit on the porch with my coffee and realize how far we've come. The chaos that once filled our days has faded into something softer, something that no longer grips my chest the way it used to. When I think back on everything, the betrayal, the danger, the unraveling, it feels like remembering a storm from a distance. The damage was real, but so was the rebuilding. Lauren has found her footing again. I see strength in her that she never knew she had. And watching her grow into herself has been one of the quiet blessings of this entire ordeal. And I've changed too. I've learned that protecting the people you love sometimes means walking through darkness you never expected to face. But it also means discovering reserves of courage you didn't know were there. Our lives aren't perfect, but they're peaceful. We talk more. We rest more. We no longer carry the weight of someone else's choices. Gratitude has slowly replaced fear, and there's a steadiness to our days that I don't take for granted. If there's one lesson I'm carrying forward, it's this. The truth may break you for a moment, but it also frees you. Healing isn't quick, but it is possible. And none of us are as alone as we feel in our hardest chapters. If you've ever faced something that shook your world, I hope you'll share your story. I read every comment, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.